everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. A podcast for
anyone.
I'm so out of practice.
Okay.
My blurb is actually really good on the podcast thing. Take two. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a podcast for strong, creative, ambitious, and somewhat sarcastic gals who get that life isn't as simple as we'd like to think.
It's not? No, just kidding.
It's
I'm
totally
just
simple. As you guys know, sometimes it's just me talking to you guys, and sometimes we have the bestie join us, and in case you didn't guess, she's here today.
Hello.
Really quick intros in case this is your first time listening to the podcast. I'm Des, and I'm a life and business coach for young adults who are kind of figuring out the corporate thing or deciding and navigating the entrepreneur or solopreneur experience. That's what I do. I have my master's in psych and I have an MBA, so that's what kind of means I know what I'm talking about.
Kind of.
And then, Tammy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Tammy. I also have degrees. So, I have a master's.
With an S.
Degrees with an S. I have a master's in clinical psychology. I also have an MBA. I'm working on my doctorate. I'm just about done. So close.
So close.
So, she keeps me around to talk about sciencey things and kind of, I don't know.
She keeps me in check. She makes sure I don't go too woo on us all.
Yes, that's my job.
And so, okay. The podcast just went live on iTunes, earlier this week, and that was really, really exciting. It had been up on the hosting service for a while, and me and all of my brilliance did not realize that did not mean it still wasn't on iTunes.
Live and learn.
So, got that up, and since it's been on iTunes, hey, we have listeners now, and we got questions, and I'm so excited. Really great response, actually, and I'm super stoked about everything that's happened in the last few days. But today we decided to just kind of open up with questions that people have asked, and there was one that really stood out because it's something that's come up a lot in conversation recently, and I know Tammy and I have both experienced it previously, and I feel like there's a part of me that kind of goes through it every day as a coach, and that is imposter syndrome. Someone wrote about just starting a new job and feeling like they really have no idea what they're doing and isn't quite sure, how to manage it. So we're going to take a moment and talk about that.
Yeah, so if you feel like you're faking it, you are in good company, because I know it has happened to me countless times. I know, Des, it's happened to you. I feel like grad school is a whole lesson in imposter syndrome and just feeling like you don't belong there, especially your first year. You don't know what you're doing. You don't have the hang of things.
First year, first day when you sit in a room and everyone's going around talking about all the things they've done. Yeah. And, the thing is no matter what you've done for experience, everyone else's sounds so cool compared to what
better.
You've done.
Makes you want to run from the room screaming.
So, it's super, super common, and I think one thing that's important is it's not just an everyman thing. I know Emma Watson's been on record talking about feeling like a fake, and
I think it happens from the bottom to the top. I don't think you ever get to this point where you're like, I've got this now. I'm an expert.
I read this article that actually said something along the lines of the more you achieve, the more you feel like an imposter. So it can grow with success.
To me. Yeah, it actually makes sense.
So first off, know you're not alone and that it's super common. That is the first piece.
Totally. Totally. I mean, I think it can actually indicate positive things about you. I think that, like, it's tends to be this feeling of being a fake, this feeling of being a phony. It tends to be associated with people who are really intelligent, people who are really persistent, and people who really have a lot of competence. I don't know how many people who you might define as like a slacker who just are like, I'm so stressed about being a faker. Like, it just... I don't think that happens.
No, I mean, there's something to be said for being blissfully unaware.
Yeah.
And stressfully, if that's a word, aware of limitations and stuff.
Yeah, so you can kind of think of it as being rampant among some of our most competent people. Like, people you look at and you would never expect it. You'd be like, you? Like, you felt like an imposter? I wouldn't have thought that.
And one thing to note is it's really stressful and it can be really hard to navigate, like, as you're going through it. But if you're looking for a way to kind of flip it or to kind of sit with it for a minute, like, it shows limitations and that you have the self-awareness.
Yeah.
You know, which is something that not everyone has. So, in a weird, unfortunate way, it's a little bit like a gift.
I mean, I think that's a great reframe. Really, it's all about reframing, right? I mean, I know that, like, feeling like an imposter is so uncomfortable. And the thing is like, I know people, right, and they're like, how do I make this stop? And the response is really like, it's not really about stopping it. It's about hearing that voice and accepting it and being like, I really feel like a fraud today, and okay, I'm going to go out into the world anyway and do my best. And recognize, and I think that's like the first part. It's really listening to that voice, acknowledging that it's there, and that it's okay that it's there.
Yeah.
And then, some recognition that you're really failing to recognize your own accomplishments and your own achievements.
Yes.
Right? You get that new job, you're like, oh, I don't belong here. Well, what were all the accomplishments and achievements that led the people who hired you to think that you were the right person for the job in the first place?
Well, and, like, what did you do beforehand? Like, it's not even just about the other people, like, giving you the approval for that position or anything. Because, like, if you're an entrepreneur, like, this is super rampant among entrepreneurs and stuff. But it's like, what experiences did you have beforehand that gave you the confidence to think that the business was a good idea, or that you did fit for the job? Like, you had to be confident when you submitted the job application. You had to be confident when you registered, like, as a business. Like, there was some part of confidence in there.
Right.
What were those reasons?
Yeah. And I think part of it is that, like, we tend to compare ourselves to others. Everyone does this, right? Like, I'm sitting in a room with Des, and I'm like, wow, she sounds so much better on this podcast than me. And, like, she might be saying the same thing about me, right? Like, we all do these comparison things all the time. It's just kind of normal. And so, like, although I hate the word normal, but it's kind of...
Common.
It's common, thank you. And yet, what happens when we do that is we tend to, like, play down our own level of competence, our own level of accomplishments, and we tend to play up the other person's.
Yes.
So maybe we're both on even footing, but by the time I'm done, I'm way at the bottom, and the other person's way at the top.
And that happens pretty much in everything in life, right? Like, even in clothing and stuff, like, that looks so much better on you than it does on me, when really, like, that's as subjective as anything.
Right.
So, yeah, I think, like, it's not about comparing with someone else, because one thing that's really important to remember is the fact that everyone has a different story. So there is absolutely no equal playing ground.
Yeah.
So, like, Tammy's experience up to this point has been completely different than my experience up to this point.
Yep.
It's completely unfair to either of us to try to judge and find some equality in this moment.
Right.
If you want to get super abstract.
I think that's a great point. I mean, like, if you think about, like, social psych, like, we tend to be like research has shown that we tend to be poor judges of our own performance. Like we rate ourselves better than average. We think we do better on tests than we've actually done. And so if you think about like this idea of imposter syndrome, it's actually this idea that we as individuals have a respect for the limits of our abilities. We're not engaging in that that overconfidence that humans tend to engage in. So it's actually very limiting and actually can be very adaptive, if that makes sense.
Well, and I feel like there's, as with everything, right, there's a bit of an evolutionary draw. Like, you don't want to be too overconfident because if we're talking like hunter-gatherer stage and you go up to a beast and you can't take it over, you're going to die.
Right.
Like, I feel like I go back to that so often, like when I do the courses and stuff, it's all about self-preservation and making sure that you're going to wake up the next day.
Yep.
And when something challenges that, it's nerve-wracking and scary.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about like behaviors that people do, they do them for a reason. They do them because they help them in some way, right? So this idea that I'm a fake, I'm an imposter, I can't do this, I'm not competent enough, it actually is this buffer against if you do fail, you're like, oh, see, I knew it. And so it's kind of protective of our own egos in a way. Because, like, nobody wants to feel vulnerable and then fail. So in this way, it's kind of protective.
Yeah. I think the flip side of that is I wonder how often it serves as like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Oh, totally.
I'm
not saying it's functional in the sense that, like, it's healthy functioning. I'm just saying it kind of serves a function, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I work with clients all the time where behaviors have served a purpose in the past and they're still doing them and they've kind of outlived their usefulness. Yeah. And so, yes, it's serving a purpose for them, but is it helping you achieve your goals? Is it helping you get to where you're going? Is it helping you adapt and fulfill, right?
Yeah. Oh my god, I do that so much in other areas of my life. Like, I have a very large religious background where, like, the female is supposed to be, like, the support to the guy, and I see that, like, pop up in my relationship all the time where, like, I'm like, well, you decide, honey, you're the guy, but the behavior doesn't serve me anymore.
Right.
So it's always, like, this constant check, and, like, with my husband, we've had those interactions where I'm like, I don't know, what do you want to do? Wait, yes, I do know, here's the thing.
Right.
You know, so
it's like overcoming that, right? And also if you think about the way that the, like, imposter syndrome, like, where, pardon me, I can't talk today, imposter syndrome and where you see that the most, like, I would expect you tend to see it at the beginning of activities, right? Like, you may have the competence and the skills, and yes, starting in a new job where you don't know the policies and procedures of the new organization. They might do things all differently. And so you feel like you don't know what you're doing. You feel like you're just swimming and, like, barely keeping your head above water, and yet that doesn't really mean you're not competent. It means that you're learning new things, and that can be uncomfortable until you achieve mastery of the things you don't know about yet.
And that's, I mean, if there's, like, some sort of olive branch for hope or anything, like, because it is about sitting with those feelings and kind of managing it, but also, like, one thing would be as they say, it gets better. Like, as you go through your job or develop your business, like, day in, day out, it's going to be more common. And then it's going to feel less scary. You're going to start feeling like you have a grasp on things.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think you bring up a good point, which is one of the ways to cope with this is to just ride it out and kind of ride the wave of that emotion. I think another thing you can do is be very conscientious in trying to internalize your success, right? We can sometimes attribute our success to things outside of ourselves, like, oh, I couldn't have done it unless XYZ happened, and we minimize our own participation in that. And so part of feeling like a fraud is this lack of internalization of the successes that we have had.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about, like you mentioned it, imposter syndrome it occurs most often in, like, academics and people that are more high functioning. And the thing is like, another character trait of that general population is perfectionism and things like that, where you don't, where like no matter what you do, even if you turn a project in or deliverable to your boss or whatever, and it's fine, in your mind you're still like, well, this could have been different, it could have been like this, so then you don't acknowledge those successes, so then when you need to have them to reference, you don't.
Right.
So
You
definitely.
can't pull them up as easily. Yeah, totally.
So, let's see. Long story short with imposter syndrome, super common.
Yep. Totally overcomable, if that's a word. You can
Mm-hmm.
overcome it. It's possible.
You can overcome it, or like wait it out. Like I feel like waiting it out. Also.
You can wait it out. I think waiting it out implies that you're not really doing anything.
True.
I think you can do a lot of things. I think self-compassion plays a big role here. And I think having someone like your bestie remind you of your success, like, I know we've done that. I know we've done that many times throughout my graduate school career, throughout your graduate school career, where you were like, nope, I just don't know if I can do it. I just don't think I'm good enough. I'm like, well, remember this, and this. And you're like, oh yeah, okay, I forgot about that. And sometimes you do. You forget for a hot minute because you're feeling overwhelmed by all the stress and the pressure and the what ifs and the ambiguity. I hate to use that word, but like the unknown of what you're walking into.
Totally.
And so like, until you start to know those things more, it's being gentle with yourself.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing that I actually talk about in the course, so I haven't mentioned it yet, but I do a course on imposter syndrome called Fake, Faux, Fool, and 4-letter words to forget when you're ready to rain your way. And one thing that like we go through in that is writing out every single accomplishment that you've done and like pieces of like praise and respect that other people have given you.
Yeah.
So you have that to reference for those times when you feel so like overcome with, I don't know what I'm doing, I can't do this, what am I doing here?
When you feel paralyzed.
Then you have like a reference, and even, when times get so stressful, it can help be a bit of a centering piece.
Agreed. It brings you back into that balance, right? That we've talked. I know we've talked about that before, but I'm really all about finding balance. It doesn't have to be in the center, but if it pulls you off those edges just a little bit, you're gonna find it a little bit easier to tolerate whatever's going on and to kind of sit with it a little bit better.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think that's it for today. I think we're just gonna do maybe one question at a time for now. But if you have any questions, comments, or anything, shoot me an email, Desiree@action-attitude.com, or you can find me on all the social media at DesWMsMBA. And yeah.
And remember, you're not a fraud.
No.
You're just you.
That's it. Leave a comment, rate, subscribe, do all the things that you do for podcasts that you like. And hey, if this was beneficial, share it with a friend. All right, talk to you guys later.
All right, take care.
Bye.